Welcome back to the Jyotish project. My name is Sachin Sharma, and we are doing this series called How to Study Jyotish. This is lecture 6, What to Study First and Why. So let's get right into it. So, the objective of this lecture is to clarify why most students feel lost in Jyotish, not because the subject is too vast, which it sort of is, but also because we've begun in the wrong place. So we'll see what is that wrong place and why is it wrong. We will make the case that all study must begin with the grahas, the structuring intelligence of perception and experience, and show how rāśis, bhāvas, avasthās, yogas, dashās are only meaningful when built upon that foundation. So, this lecture outlines the philosophical order of study, explains why skipping steps leads to superstition and confusion, and offers a spiral based roadmap for lifelong clarity in Jyotish. So, these are the 6 sections we're going to cover. Why where you begin matters more than you think, the central role of the grahas, why not start with science houses or yogas, a philosophical order of study, why skipping leads to superstition and confusion, and how to use this sequence as a lifelong spiral. So, the idea of spiral and not stack was also evoked in the previous lecture. And the spiralic, the idea around the spiral is moving up and down, but also evokes complexity, nuance, and that's the need for humility and sincerity in the learning process itself, and the non-linear way some things work in Jyotish, though we need a sequence, but still. So these are the 6 sections, and let's get into it. Why the point of entry conditions the entirety of the study. So in many disciplines, the point of entry is variable. In Jyotish, it is formative. It will decide how your entire relationship to the discipline is forming. Why? Because Jyotish is not a modular collection of ideas that can be assembled in any order. It is a hierarchical, integrative, and causal architecture where each part derives its meaning through its relationship to the whole. The sequence in which one enters the system silently conditions the structure of one's perception, the habits of emphasis, what one emphasizes on their studies, and omission, what they're not focusing on in their studies, the patterns of confusion and inertia, and ultimately, the orientation one takes as a practitioner, analyst, or seeker. What kind of astrologer, Jyotishi one becomes depends on the point of entry. So it's very important to enter with the right kind of orientation, start at the right point. One of the biggest mistakes to do in Jyotish is to start studying through with rāśis. So most students begin in the middle. They start with rāśis, bhāvas, yogas, or isolated components. They memorize formulae, they pursue techniques. The system then appears mechanical, contradictory, or even unworkable. But this disorientation does not arise from the system itself. It arises from a failure of orientation, failure of understanding. The philosophical understanding is so broken. We don't understand why rashis are not the first things to be studied, why grahas are to be studied first, and then rashis are to be studied, and then bhavas are to be studied, and then one more thing. So there's a progression in which it works. We're not supposed to start with Aries is this. No, we're supposed to study Mars and then be like Aries, that first Rashi, and eighth Rashi, which is called as Scorpio in the Western terms, the Mesha, Vrishchika, or the first psychospatial division of the Bha Chakra, and the eighth psychospatial division of the Bha Chakra. These are domains and as of governed by Mars. What does this tell about Mars? What is the Aries aspect of Mars, the Scorpionic aspect of Mars? But Mars is the fundamental psychostructuring principle. Rashi is the field operated by that graha, and whatever passes through that field will be modulated by the energetics of that psychospatial field by Aries or Scorpio and stuff like that. You're not supposed to study Aries and Scorpio first. Supposed to study Grahas, study Mars first. So every coherent Vidya presupposes an initiatory threshold, a locus where the logic of the system discloses itself. So in Jyotish, this threshold is not technical, it is ontological, it is structural, it's telling us about the nature of being. Even in Sankhya, we're not supposed to say there's a progression that from tanmatras this comes, then jnanendriyas, karmendriyas. So we start with, okay, there is Purush, Prakriti, Mahat, right? So there's a ahankar, there's a progression. You can't just be saying, yeah, ahankar is here, we can start with studying ahankar, and then manas is something, and let's study jnanendriyas or karmendriyas first, and then we'll go to pancha mahabhutas, we'll understand the tattvas later. We have to start with what is prakriti. We start with that, right? What is purush? What is the nature of purush? What is prakriti? Similarly, there's an order in Jyotish. We can't break that order. It is because these are structural, ontological things. What is the nature of what we are studying? What are the constituents of lived experience, which are the grahas? What is the relationship between consciousness and causality? These are not abstract questions, they are the starting point, and that means we must begin with the grahas. These three questions are directly implying something about the nature of the grahas. Grahas are the fundamental structuring forces of perception, mood, desire, action, restraint. They are the bhutas. The grahas are the ontological core, the beings through which karma becomes visible and time becomes experience. So, to study Jyotish without first understanding the grahas is to read a language without knowing its alphabet. It is to construct without foundation. The real question is not where should I start studying. It is what is central. How can I allow that center to orient to the rest? Everything else, method, technique, application follows from this. So, the idea is not where should I start because there's no choice. We should start with what? With whatever is central, the foundational pillar. And once we answer that question, what is central, which is grahas, naturally we know where we need to start. So we'd be like, oh, that's where I start. That's what's central. That's the main thing, the foundation of everything. That's so. So the central role of the grahas. So the grahas are the core structuring forces of Jyotish. They're not just objects in the sky, they are the archetypal intelligences through which consciousness enters experience. Through they're the phenomenological psychophenomenology, the ontology, the psychometaphysical structuring principles that are giving us a certain metaphysical laws rooted in certain structure interactions, their dynamics, which is causing experience to unfold a certain way. And that which is experiencing all of this is the consciousness behind all of this, which is termed as Atman or whatever one wants to call it, depending on their so called religion. So every sensation, impulse, action, emotion, and cognition arises through the field of the grahas. So they are the 10 great thresholds through which the self encounters time, karma, and embodiment. Nine great threshold, not 10. So sun is attention, illumination, and self-awareness. The moon is perception, emotion, and adaptation. Mars is being energetic, assertion, effort, courage, protection of the innocent. Mercury is cognition, language, and learning. Jupiter is meaning, discernment, and growth. Venus is attraction, harmony, devotion, fulfillment. Saturn is form, limitation, responsibility, forbearance. Rahu and Ketu are the unconscious drives, the chaos and residue of karma. The the Rahu and Ketu has its own lectures, the Rahu Ketu files, which we're gonna at some point restart once we finish off with the How to Study Jyotish series. But the point is, they are the these are the structuring forces that are giving a certain way we interact. You take out one of the grahas, you take out one of your capacities. You So if you do not understand these forces clearly, you cannot interpret anything else correctly. Because every rashi, every bhava, every yoga, Every transit is simply describing how a graha is expressing itself through time and space, and nothing more. Everything just eventually, just from a fundamental thing, it just teaches us how the graha is modulating our experience. Whether we study a rashi, whether we study a bhava yoga, anything. So graha is the subject, the rest is the context. This is why Rishi Parashara, begins not with rules but with the identities of the grahas, their names, their nature, their action, their relationships. Because without knowing them, everything else becomes fragmented. When you begin with the grahas, you learn to recognize their voices within yourself. You understand what is actually moving through rashis and bhavas. You stop projecting your preferences onto the chart. You begin to see Jyotish as a living system of psychological metaphysical weather and not a predictive machine. So while others begin with signs, traits, and combinations, you begin at the origin of experience. That which experiences, which is sun and moon, that's where the study starts. You begin with the forces that give rise to the chart itself, and that changes everything, right? The fundamental psycho metaphysical structuring principles are the grahas. The Pancha Mahabhutas are the five Pancha Grahas. We don't need Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, probably needs a separate lecture. But these are the core things, the central things. So, this is where we need to start our studies. So, why not start with science houses or yogas? Let's take a moment to look at that. Many students begin with Jyotish the way one begins a board game, right? With labels. They memorize zodiac signs, study the 12 houses, collect yogas, and quickly the system begins to feel like a maze, full of contradictions, exceptions, and guesswork. Why? Because none of those components have meaning on their own. Rashis do not act. They are fields of expression. They're fields of modulating fields, 30-degree section of space, directional qualities through which grahas operate. Bhavas do not generate anything. They are locations of manifestation. The where, not the what or the who. They are where. Where is it happening? Yogas are not fixed truths. They are interactions, dynamic relationship between what grahas, whose meaning depends entirely on the context and dignity, and so many other factors that makes a yoga a certain way. So, in other words, all of these depends on graha for their activation. The graha is the core. So Rashi has no power until a graha enters it. A bhava has no meaning until a graha occupies it or aspects it. Even when people say I have an empty Rashi, an empty bhava, we look at the ruler, the Lord, what we call the the force that governs that space. We still depending on the graha, and grahas avasthās, the states of the grahas. How what state you're going through depends on the state that the graha is going through. So why would we start our studies with rashis? So yoga has no effect until the grahas involved are assessed by strength, avastha, relationship, and context. That's why you don't start with signs or bhavas or rashis or yogas and avasthas and Rahu and Ketu. Never touch Rahu and Ketu for the longest time. Study the sun, moon, and the panchagrahas. Saptagrahas, the first five, and then Rahu Ketu will come later on. Starting with these components without understanding what a graha is leads to literalism, predictive fantasy, psychological projection, a confused reliance on haphazardly curated formulae over perception. So we technique scavenging starts happening. All of these things start happening. We start saying things like, I'm so Libran, I'm such a Libra, I'm such a Sagittarius. It's the graha, like what's Jupiter doing? How many grahas are in Sagittarius? A person will have Sun in Sagittarius, but they have Moon, Mercury, Mars in Scorpio. Are they more Sagittarian or more Scorpionic? And they're not Scorpionic, they are more martial. And the Scorpio side of Mars has two sides. One is Aries, which is head to head combat, and one is Psyop, psychological warfare, which is Scorpio. It's one way to look at Mars. But it's telling us about the nature of the graha itself. Graha is the fundamental structuring principle. That's why it says Sarva Atmacha Divanatha. Sun is the Atman, Manas, moon, Sattvam Kujo. Mars is Sattva, strength of character. Mercury is Vani Pradayak, the cognitive faculty of speech, the capacity to hear oneself, the voices. Jnana Sukhado, Devedyo Jnana Sukhado. Jupiter is the one that gives wisdom, the wisdom that gives Sukh. These are psychostructuring principles of experience that's modulating our experience a certain way. So grahas are the first things to be studied. So you might know hundreds of yogas, but if you don't understand what a troubled Venus feels like or what an exalted Mars does, you're just stacking rules on emptiness. This is not our fault. This is the result of an education system that teaches content without hierarchy and structure and philosophical grounding. But Jyotish has hierarchy. It has a system, it has a structure. Things come before and after each other. It is ontological. There is a reason Parashara Rishi begins with Grahas, because everything else is downstream from their influence. To truly understand Rashi's Bhavas Yogas, you must first learn to just focus on Grahas for the longest time, to feel its impulses, its distortions, its wisdom, to recognize it within your experience, speech patterns, everything, just graha orientation has to be there for the longest time. And that in and of itself is a technique. If you can see reality as graha principle at work, different dynamic interaction, then the natural relationships of the grahas. That in and of itself will teach you more Jyotish than anything you'll do after that. Only then will the rest of the chart will come alive. So, what is the philosophical order of study? Jyotish is not a flat field of information. It is a layered metaphysical architecture built from principles that reflect how consciousness becomes experience, how consciousness becomes modulated, how pure awareness becomes distorted torment that we are currently experiencing. That means there's a natural order to study, not based on ease or popularity, but on how the system unfolds from the origin to outcome. So here's one such order, a principled order. Grahas, these are the structuring intelligences, begin here. Everything arises through them. Each graha is a principle of consciousness, karma, and function. They're not merely symbols. They're not merely archetypes. They're not merely metaphors. They are ontological forces that grab, distort, and or clarify the light of attention. Then you get into rāśis, fields of directional influences, how grahas are being modulated, how the light gets modulated in different ways, how experience gets distorted in different ways. It's like a 30-degree section of space through which, when influence enters, Graha's principle manifests, modulation occurs. So once you understand who the Grahas are, you can study how they behave differently in each Rashi. Rashis are not personality types, they are qualities of space that shape how Grahas express their function, which creates a dynamic whole persona. The personality that we feel we are is a collection of everything put together, and the interaction between that everything. Bhavas, what are bhavas? Bhavas are locations of manifestation. Bha, it's related to bhulok. That's why it's bhava. It anchors through the lagna to earth. So grahas are the principles, rashis are the space around earth, and bhava anchors that space onto a particular point and subjectivizes the whole experience. So bhavas reflect the existential domains where grahas operate: identity, family, speech, home, creativity, etc. But their meaning is not fixed. It depends on the graha and on the deeper psychological architecture of the individual. So it has to be modulated, it has to be work together. Rashis and bhavas have to work in tandem, and the grahas also. So, but you start with grahas, rashis, bhavas, avasthās, inner states of the grahas, lajjitadi avasthās, different jagradadi avasthās, baladi avastha. What are they telling us about the nature of the grahas? These describe the mood, clarity, maturity of each graha. No graha can be interpreted well without knowing its avastha, because no force acts the same when starved, shamed, delighted, exhausted. What are these grahas doing? Yogas, then you get into yogas, interplay of karmic bhava yogas, right? Or different graha yogas. Yogas are the architectural alignments of the chart. They describe tension, support, structure. They are meaningless without understanding the nature, strength, and dignities of the grahas that are involved. Then you get into dashas and gochara, timing of karmic unfoldment. Dashas tell you when something becomes active. But unless you've understood the grahas and their placements first, timing is just noise. That's why people start saying things like, "Oh, you're in Saturn Rahu, it's going to be bad. You're in Saturn Mahadasha and Rahu Antardasha." But we don't know. Maybe Saturn is doing amazing and Rahu's ruler is good and things are going good, and the person's like, "Yeah, I mean, it's there is Saturn and Rahu kinds of themes playing out, but life's been pretty good." And you wouldn't know why because the graha has to be understood. So we can't start with dashas, we can't start with transits and gochara and stuff like that. Phala, and then you get the result, the phal, the fruit. Only after all of this has been assimilated, nature of the grahas, its context, its condition, its timing, can we begin to interpret the phal. Now we get the final interpretation, the final fruit, the outcome, the experiential result of karmic unfolding. So it is a sequence that reflects how reality organizes itself from origin, graha, to expression, rashi, to location, bhava, to condition, avastha, to relationship, yoga, to activation, dasha and gochara, to consequence, phal. This is not what to study, it is how to see. And then the moment you see what you're seeing clearly, you'll know what to study, in what order to study. So this is the order, and there are obviously other things like uh, right before, right after bhavas, bhava yogas need to be touched upon. Natural relationship of the grahas need to be touched upon right after teaching grahas. Avasthas, before avasthas, you need to study shadbal. So there are technical, mathematical things that need to be added in the middle, but this is the basic main framework. This is the logic that it's following. So why skipping leads to superstition and confusion? So it is a system as layered as Jyotish, the order of study is not academic, it is epistemic. It determines what kind of knower you will become. When students skip over the fundamentals, when they jump into yogas, quick fixes, and predictions, they are not just being impatient. They are setting themselves up for superstition, confusion, and spiritual bypassing. And a lot of I was so confused for the first 3 or 4 years. We were just emphasizing on rāśis and bhava yogas and stuff. We never got to spending time with grahas. And that's when that work was done, that's when things really unlocked in my personal studies. So this again comes from my own realizations, my own personal pain points and stuff with how I've been taught and how Jyotish is being studied. So here's what skipping the order produces: misinterpretation of grahas sorry, as personality traits arising from Rashi symbolism. So we are trying to understand grahas how from Rashi symbolism, not Rashis from graha, but graha from Rashi. Instead of karmic intelligences, psychostructuring principles, sattvam. Why sattvam? What is strength of character? What does strength of character of Mars have to do with Scorpio? The eighth psychospatial, I don't like calling it Scorpio, it's that limits the animal symbol, is limits the understanding of the eighth psychospatial division. What does Mars, Kuja, these names tell us about the first psychospatial division, Aries, called Mesha? So literalist readings of yogas without assessing dignity, context, or timing, this starts happening. Blind faith in remedies start without understanding the root condition being addressed. So a person would say, "Oh, your mercury is bad. You start chanting this mantra and everything will be fine." No, they probably need speech therapy. They probably need to start learning how to read patiently and develop a reading habit. Or the person probably needs some kind of mercurial help, like they literally have some really foundational structural thing, some kind of habit tracking thing, or they probably need a cognitive behavior therapy kind of thing. But to say that Mercury's bad, just do this mantra, you'll be fine. No, because we're not understanding grahas are very much part of the structure of our being. So they need to be, to fix it, we need to fix something within our reality, and it's not magic. Confusion over contradictory techniques without a framework to prioritize or filter. That starts happening. Contradictory technique scavenging, projection on to clients or oneself instead of reflection and inquiry starts. Obsessive attempts to control, mistaking technique for transformation. So these are the kinds of things we start doing when we are just studying bhavas. Like, oh, your Jupiter in the first bhava. First bhava is your body. Your body is going to be like Jupiter. Instead of understanding what is Jupiter, what are the things of Jupiter, we don't even need to get into the bhava. What is the dignity of Jupiter? How Jupiter is interacting with the rest of the psychostructure. That work has to be done. And then, okay, it's in the first power. This is something there. It, what does it do? It gives a certain shadbal. It gives a certain directional strength, maybe that adds some points to the shadbal, and then that would do something else to the avasthās because of that calculation. So we have to stop collecting Jyotish randomly from the internet. Probably all of the things that I said, you probably try to pick out. Don't try to pick out anything from it with technique based, or try to understand that this has to be studied in a structured, gradual, slow, and steady fashion, one step at a time. And most importantly, loss of philosophical grounding starts, distortion of logic, ethics, and frameworks. No coherent dialogue is possible. You Jyotishis speak over each other. Everyone just believes in their own stuff. Everyone's Jyotish is different. Everyone is a researcher. Everyone has unlocked some special techniques. They will demystify Jyotish. So you may still be doing some kind of astrology of some sort, but you're no longer in the field of Jyotish. You've entered a realm of projections of your own subjective psychological theater, dressed up in Sanskrit. This is why order matters, because the integrity of the system depends on the integrity of your perception. Your perception is shaped by what you study first, how you study it, and why you study it. Skipping foundational study isn't just inefficient, it's dangerous. I lost many years because of that, because it leads to misapplication of a system designed to illuminate karma, not bypass it. So if you feel lost, overwhelmed, or overexposed to contradictory techniques, don't go looking for another method, another technique. Go back, start again, go back to the grahas. Everything else will reassemble itself from there naturally. Progress from grahas, then rāśis, then bhāvas, and then Jyotish will start unlocking in a very healthy way. How to use this sequence as a lifelong spiral. So, the sequence we've outlined from grahas to phala is not just a syllabus, but a spiral of vision. There's a philosophy behind it as well. You don't complete it once and move on. You return again and again, each time with more nuance, more clarity, more humility. At first, you may just memorize the names of the grahas, which is good, important. Then you start to feel their impulses in yourself. Then you start to see them in others. Eventually, they begin to speak through the chart, through your own inner process, and you start seeing how your design is, what your design is, why it is the way it is, and how it makes, why, in what ways it makes you operate certain ways. So this is how real study works. You move through theory, application, and integration cyclically. Each pass reveals a deeper layer. Every time you go through it, deeper layer would unfold. Each layer refines your ability to see more clearly, not just what's in a chart, but what's arising in your experience. The chart is just a diagrammatic representation of experience of life. So when you're looking at the map, you're looking at the sky at the moment of birth. There are directions in the map. The grahas are the structuring principles in your antariksh, in your inner space, and there's a certain metaphysics to it. So we have to understand that we're studying a diagrammatic representation of a metaphysical phenomenon. So this is what makes Jyotish a darshan, a system of recursive vision that teaches you how to read not just symbols but read reality itself. You're working with ongoing reality, which is Maya ultimately, but real in the sense of like this doesn't feel good. If I hit myself, there's a thing here, right? So this is real in though from an ultimate perspective it's Maya, but so we are always working with rational, grounded facts in Jyotish, with practicalities. We are never working with impractical, lofty ideas. So how do you use this spiral? Begin with the Grahas, study rāśis in the light of the Grahas, study bhāvas as field of in which Grahas operate, add complexity only as your clarity deepens. Don't rush to yogas or dashas without proper anchoring. Let transformation and not performance be your measure of progress. When you transform, your performance will actually naturally improve. Above all, keep returning, keep revising, keep coming back to the subject. Let the system reintroduce itself to you again and again as you become a different kind of student. So, reorient yourself as a student, because the real sequence is not just external, it is internal, it is qualitative, it is heart based. The more sincere your posture, the clearer the grahas will become, and through them life, karma and consciousness will slowly start to make sense. The randomness, the chaos of life will start to land in a different way, to whatever degree possible for each one of us. So thank you so much. I hope this helps us understand where we should start our studies, why we should start where I say we should start, and tell me like where what got you confused in your studies, what got you what messed up your progress in your studies, what kind of mistakes you made, so that we can all learn and sort of avoid that, so we can share this wisdom with each other. We sort of share this information with each other and derive whatever is useful for each of us. So thank you so much if you're still here for these rather long lectures always. And thank you so much. I'll see you in the next lecture.